Today, I want to share the story of how I became fluent in Spanish because I'm an English teacher, I'm from England, I'm 100% English, but I speak fluent Spanish. And by listening to my story and my tips and techniques, I hope that you can feel inspired to improve your English and use some of the things that I've used to get where I am at the moment and speak Spanish fluently. It all started at school, and not primary school, not even secondary school really, because at primary school I didn't do any Spanish, a tiny bit of French. Then when you're at secondary school, you don't start with foreign languages, but you might have 1 hour of French and Spanish per week. And I wasn't that interested in languages at the time because, like most Brits, we think everyone speaks English. So what's the point? What's the point in learning another language? But after a while, I started to enjoy the theatre and acting of learning another language. I liked to, goof around and be a little bit silly speaking the language. Like, hola, ¿qué tal? Una cerveza, por favor. And I started, to copy maybe Mexican accents that I had heard on American films. Like, for example, hasta la vista, baby. So I started enjoying these kind of interactions with the language, and that, let's say, was a spark, and that created some interest in the language. And this all happened at the same time as I got into watching lots of travel and culture documentaries. Because I was, let's say, 14, 15, 16, 17, and at the time I was fascinated by the big, wide world. And I was dreaming of becoming independent to be able to travel all over the place. And if you speak the language of the country where you are going to visit, it's a huge advantage, and you can interact with the local people and, have a more memorable experience. So this was the beginning of me having fun impersonating a Mexican accent and becoming more and more interested in the world and traveling. So, with all of this in mind, and the fact that, I didn't know what to do with my life. I had no idea what I wanted to do for work when I was in my late teens. So, in the UK, when you're 16, 17, 18, you need to be preparing yourself and deciding what you want to study and what job you want to have. And I always knew that I wanted to go to university because I thought, it's lots of partying, meeting new people, moving to another city. All of my mates were planning on doing the same thing as well. So I was clear about this, that I wanted to go to uni. But I had no idea what I actually wanted to study. So I was thinking maybe I can study something related to sports and the human body. So naturally, I considered being a physiotherapist. But I thought that being a physio, it doesn't really open that many options. If you're a physiotherapist, you are a physiotherapist. That's it, really. So I liked the idea of delaying this decision-making process and continuing to learn and study and open up possibilities and many different doors and broaden my horizons. So, given that I already enjoyed my Spanish classes, I thought, languages. I'll study languages. Because especially one interesting thing is that when you study languages, you have to spend a year abroad. So I did that, and I chose to go to the University of Liverpool, and I studied what was called Hispanic Studies and Italian. I already knew a little bit of Spanish, but hardly any, to be honest. And I wanted to add another language, so I also added Italian from scratch, from a beginner level. And that's what I started to do at uni. But at university, for an 18-year-old guy who likes making friends, going out, having fun, well, there were a lot of distractions. I had moved out of my parents' house. I was living with people who were also at university in student accommodation. So I didn't really study anything. I didn't really improve my Spanish or Italian. Of course, a little bit. I went to classes, but I didn't immerse myself in the language. And most of the time, I was going out, drinking, partying, meeting girls, and language learning wasn't a priority for the first 2 years of university. From the ages of 18 to 20, I was studying in more of a traditional way with textbooks and doing assignments, lots of homework, but that was it really. I wasn't actually using the language. But then, thank God, the moment came to go abroad. And in my second year of university, I had to make another big decision of where to go to spend my year abroad. And I had to spend half of the time in a Spanish-speaking country and half of the time in Italy or an Italian-speaking country, which is just Italy, really. Maybe Switzerland, but come on. I didn't study Italian to go and spend time in Switzerland. If there are any Swiss people here, I apologize. It's nothing against you. But I already knew that Spain would be the easy option, and the option that probably a lot of my friends were going to pursue. And I wanted to be a little bit different. I wanted to live a big adventure. And I had already been on holiday to Spain with my family, and I didn't plan on living in South America for the long run, for a long, long time. So I thought, I'm probably going to go back to Spain in the future, and it'll always be there, close to the United Kingdom. So I thought, all right, South America. I'm going to spend 6 months in South America. So I was weighing up the options, thinking, should I go to Mexico? Should I go to Peru? Should I go to Colombia? Maybe Uruguay? Maybe Chile? Maybe Ecuador? There are so many options and so many amazing places that I wanted to visit and still really want to visit. But for some reason, the idea of Argentina really grabbed my attention. And I thought, ooh, Argentina's a good option because they love football. There are lots of Spanish or Italian people who move there. So the best of both worlds, right? Maybe I can practice my Spanish and my Italian at the same time. And Argentinian food, it's famous for barbecues. And I love barbecues. You know, Argentinian steak, delicious. So after deliberating and considering my options, I thought Argentina is the one. That's where I'm going to go. And I found a company that were offering some kind of exchange program where you spent 6 months in Argentina living with a host family, so you could be immersed in the language whilst you taught classes in local schools or English immersion camps, and I went for it. So I made that decision, and I ended up going from Manchester to New York, and then New York to Buenos Aires, and it was amazing. It was a little bit intimidating because I was only 20, and I was a bit nervous because for the first time I was going to be so far away from home. But thank God, luckily, the host family were amazing. They were so friendly, kind, nice, welcoming, and they were there for me if I needed anything. And I spent 6 months in a town which is in the province of Buenos Aires, but like 6 hours away, and it's called Bahia Blanca. And I worked in the local school that the family actually owned. But the family, despite actually speaking English, and they all had a decent level, they insisted on using Spanish with me. And I was very grateful for this because this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to push myself and, go outside of what I knew and try to only live in Spanish. So you can imagine that my level got better and better. So I started to become a little bit more fluent. I started watching series in Argentinian Spanish as well, which is quite different to Spanish from Spain. And another key thing was that I was dating an Argentinian girl at the time, and we were always meeting up with her friends and going out, so I could meet more and more Argentinians. And I always tried to insist on speaking to them in Spanish, so my fluency got better, my vocabulary got better, my accent got better, and this was a big turning point. At the end of my time in Argentina, I spent 6 months in Italy, in Sicily, in Palermo, and that was amazing as well. But unfortunately, I didn't really improve my Italian that much. And this is one of the reasons why my Italian today isn't very good. Because during this pivotal period, I lived with a group of people from Spain. So I went from Argentina and then continued immersing myself in Spanish, but in Italy. So again, I was living the dream, traveling around, being independent, and interacting on a daily basis in the language that I really wanted to get fluent in, Spanish. You see, nowadays, there are so many language learning applications. There are so many websites and tools that you can use to improve your language skills. Look no further than ChatGPT and AI. We can speak to robots nowadays and have a pretty realistic conversation. And yes, there were some language learning apps available. Duolingo already existed. I remember Babbel also being a thing, which I used a little bit to improve my Portuguese, but I never really used language learning apps. And at the time, the idea of like famous English teachers or Spanish teachers on Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook, or YouTube, it wasn't really a thing. I mean, come on, TikTok didn't exist at the time. This was all 10 years ago, more or less. Yeah, give or take 10 years. So we had phones, we had technology, but we didn't have so many options compared to what there is available at the moment to improve your language skills. But what did exist, and what I did in particular during this time, was whenever I didn't really want to go out, or I didn't want to socialize, which can happen quite a lot, I always tried to continue to consume content in Spanish. So I mentioned earlier, I was watching series in Argentinian Spanish just on YouTube. Even if I didn't understand everything, I just continued. I persevered, and I'd try to add subtitles in Spanish if they were available, but if not, I'd just watch and focus, and I'd kind of get the hang of it. And I'd realize what was going on, even if I didn't understand some words or phrases. You get the picture, and you kind of know what's happening. You understand enough that it's still pleasant, it's still enjoyable. It's the whole principle of comprehensible input. If you understand 80% of what you're watching, you're going to continue to watch it and then learn this other 20% of new structures, new vocabulary, new expressions, and so on and so forth. But I did this with series, I did this with music as well, because I've never been a fan of reggaeton music, which is the Spanish language music, which is probably the most famous and listened to at the moment. I can't really stand it. It's not my vibe at all. It's not my cup of tea at all. But I did kind of like some flamenco music, like modern fusion flamenco music, and I've always liked rock. So I'd listen to music in Spanish rather than in English, which is one of the reasons why I'm not very good at music knowledge, because I've always used music as more of a tool to improve my language skills rather than as a way of actually relaxing, chilling out, and having a good time. But basically, it's important that even when you're not interacting and speaking with other people and being immersed in conversations, you can still immerse yourself through content. Series, music, podcast, the list goes on and on. But at some point, this year abroad had to come to an end. The partying, the traveling, the socializing, it had to stop. So after almost a year of being in Argentina and Italy, it was time to go back to Liverpool and finish my degree and have my final year of university. So I was sad about it, but I had mixed feelings because I love Liverpool as a city as well. I had had a very good couple of years before, even if they didn't really help me to improve my language learning skills. But knowing that I was returning to university and knowing that I wanted to get good marks as well, I didn't want to fail my degree. So my mentality changed and I started to put into practice all of these tips that I'm giving you at the moment. I continued listening, watching, chatting to different friends in Spanish to stay on top of my Spanish skills and prevent it from, getting rusty. And I had the idea and the plan that upon moving back to Liverpool, I'd like to have Spanish friends, or maybe, just maybe, a Spanish girlfriend. Dun, dun, dun. So yeah, I kind of planned it in a creepy way. But hear me out. Listen to me. On the day of my birthday, the 24th of September, in case you want to send me a nice little gift, I was going to have a house party. So in my apartment, I invited some friends. I told my flatmates to invite some friends as well. And one of my friends from Palermo, she's English, but we were given buddies. So Erasmus buddies, because we did Erasmus in Italy. Our university in Liverpool told us that if we wanted, we could help Erasmus students settle in and adapt to the city, or just have our contact in case they wanted to ask us any questions or needed any help. And my friend from England, who I had been with in Italy, she had been assigned an Erasmus buddy from Spain. So I told my friend, are you coming to my birthday? If you are, you can send other people some invites. Everybody is welcome. The more, the merrier. So she invited a group of Spanish girls to my house. So I was, come on, I'm buzzing. Yeah, there's going to be international people. Whoop, whoop. So I remember opening the door and seeing some beautiful Spanish women. And they came in, they were chatting to us, and we were drinking a lot. I don't remember a lot of it. It was my birthday, so forgive me. But I met my current girlfriend, the person I have been with for the last decade. And you could say I planned it, or maybe it was destiny. It was meant to be, perhaps. But I started going out with this Spanish woman, and we got on really well. Maybe it was love at first sight, who knows? But when we were speaking and when we were chatting on Facebook or on WhatsApp or whatever messenger app we used, I'd always, again, insist on using Spanish. Her English was already pretty perfect, so what was the point in her practicing her English? So we always spoke in Spanish. And if you have a very close friend or someone you are dating, in the early days, the honeymoon period, you're constantly chatting. You're constantly talking to each other. You're trying to get to know each other as much as possible. So this practice is so useful and so underrated because it allows you to construct phrases. It gets you to understand some slang and useful phrases that other people use. So I was learning so much, and without realizing sometimes, I was copying the way that she spoke. So there were some phrases that might sound a bit feminine, but I would use them as a good student because I was copying the way that she spoke. And sometimes she would correct me and say, Lewis, that sounds a little bit girly. I say that as coarse, but most Spanish men wouldn't say it. So I had basically my own private teacher and the love of my life. And it was interesting and so useful. And my accent in Spanish started to change from being a little bit Argentinian to becoming Andaluz, which is an accent from the south of Spain, from Andalusia. And during this year, my Spanish got so much better, but of course, there was still a long way to go. With learning a language, you need practice, 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 and it is something that you need to be in contact with all the time. But this final year of uni was so important. It was essential for consolidating my Spanish that I had already learned, and I was still studying in a traditional way, but that wasn't what was making me progress. What was making me progress was meeting someone I loved and speaking to her all the time in the language I wanted to improve. And related to everything I've just said, this is really, really useful to start thinking in Spanish and thinking in the language you want to practice. If you're regularly chatting, regularly texting, regularly speaking and listening in that language, sometimes without realizing, you will start to think in that language, or maybe dream in that language. In my case, I never really remember my dreams. It's a bit sad, maybe, but I only remember my dreams when I have a nightmare. Terrible, isn't it? But if you are spending so much time with the language, it is natural to start thinking in that language. And when I finished my degree, I had to say goodbye to my girlfriend. And at the time, we weren't officially boyfriend and girlfriend because I'm English, she's Spanish. We had no idea what was in store for us in the future. We had no idea if I was going to move to Spain or she was going to move to England. So we didn't really want to commit to anything. And that summer was when I moved to the United States and worked as a football coach during the summer. But again, we kept in touch. We kept chatting. And I decided that I was going to move to Spain and Seville because she still had to finish her degree because she's a year and a half younger than me. And she's from Seville. So she was obviously going to go back there after the summer. and I had no plan. I had no real, idea of what I was going to do with my life. But I loved traveling. I loved Spanish. I loved her. So I said, let's give it a go. Let's try and make it work in Spain. So I moved to Seville. I did an English teaching course, a CELTA, for those of you who know. And I met her family. I met her friends. I started using Spanish more and more because I didn't only speak to her in Spanish, but I spoke to randomers, random people in Spanish pretty much every day. So I was effectively immersing myself in the language and living in Spanish, but not completely, because it would have been even better if I didn't work as an English teacher, because of course I was working as an English teacher, and during my classes I tried not to translate too much, of course, the odd word, or if people had a really low level, I'd use Spanish. But most of the time in class, I was speaking English. So I was practicing and improving my Spanish outside of work. But at work, it was pretty much all the time in English. So that was one thing that kind of set me back. It held me back a little bit and reduced the progress rate. But hey, no big deal. I still spent many hours per day using Spanish. I'm just saying that if I had worked 100% in Spanish as well, that would have been an even more important step to 100% immerse myself in the language. But, we've been together for 10 years. I don't live in Spain anymore, but I have Spanish friends. I have a Spanish girlfriend. So this is really how I learned to speak fluent Spanish. And I know what you're thinking. Lewis, are you telling me that I need to have an English boyfriend or girlfriend in order to speak fluently? No, it helps. It does help. I'll admit that. I'm not going to lie to you. If you are in a relationship with someone who speaks English fluently as their mother tongue and the language that you use is English, amazing. But many people who are watching this, I'm sure, will be in a relationship and their partner will also speak English. So even if you speak broken English, you can chat, WhatsApp, Facebook message each other in English. It's good practice. You can maybe have 1 or 2 days per week when you will only speak in English. Of course, you'll make mistakes, and it's not as good as having a native speaker or a teacher there all the time, but it's still useful. It's still good practice, if you ask me. And it doesn't have to be a partner in a romantic sense. It could be friends. You could make friends who speak the language you want to improve. Like I made Spanish friends, you can make English friends. So that's my story. That's the story of how I became fluent in Spanish. And hopefully my story will motivate you and inspire you even to put some of these tips into practice. Of course, some are much easier than others. And if you're thinking about moving abroad, fantastic. But make sure when you do, you don't, hang out with people from your country and stick to your comfort zone, because it's very easy to do this. Now I live in Brussels and I should really speak perfect French or Dutch even, but I don't. And it's a little bit embarrassing to say it. And you see, I don't really have French-speaking friends or Dutch-speaking friends, at least not those who I speak to in those languages. All of this is about priorities. Right now, for me, it's not a priority because I have other priorities. But many people can fall into the trap of moving abroad, thinking they're going to become fluent in that language, and then they're shocked and disappointed that they don't. But of course, if you only speak to people from your country, despite living in another country, you're not going to improve. The good news is that nowadays you don't actually have to leave your country to immerse yourself in the language. There are so many platforms, so many options, so much content that you can consume. You can have classes with teachers like me. You can have conversation exchanges with other people. You can make friends online to speak in that language. So the pandemic and technology has opened up so many possibilities, meaning that you too can become fluent in a language, English, Spanish, you name it, without actually leaving your house. Of course, it's beautiful to travel the world, connect with people, meet the love of your life, and speak the language and that way become fluent. But I know this is not going to be the case for many people. But that doesn't stop you from immersing yourself in the language, whether it's in Spanish or English. All you've got to do is make it part of your routine. Make friends, speak often, and don't be afraid of making mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. And that's how it happened for me. Not thanks to a textbook, but from living the language. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my personal story. I hope you found it useful. And if you'd like to hear more personal stories via email, you can sign up to my newsletter and there will be a link in the description. Thanks again and see you next time. Adios!